And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My very special guest is Brad Olsen, captivating speaker and award-winning author of 10 books. His keynote presentations and interviews have enlightened audiences at Contact in the Desert, Conscious Life Expo, and the Mount Shasta Summer Conference. He's also been on dozens of radio shows like Coast to Coast AM, Ground Zero, and the Patriot Underground. He's been on television shows including Ancient Aliens, America Unearthed, Beyond Belief, Book of Secrets, and more. He's traveled to all 7 continents, including Antarctica by sailboat, seeking adventure and the answers to the mysteries of humankind's past. Brad, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me on the JeffMara podcast. I've been looking forward to this, and I think we're going to have a great discussion today.
We're excited to have you. Out of all the continents you've been to, what is your favorite?
Well, boy, that's a tough one. I have been to all 7 continents, and I guess it depends on what you would define as best. So for ruins and ancient mysteries, I really like Egypt. There's really nothing like it on planet Earth. For really authentic ruins that a lot of people don't know how extensive it is, I like Angkor Wat, or the temples of Angkor, because they're very expansive. They go all the way into Thailand, and some of those temples have banyan trees growing out of them, and you really do feel like Indiana Jones when you go to Cambodia. And just for absolute solitude and otherworldly, I would say Antarctica really takes the cake on that. I was down there 5 years ago, and there's just nothing quite like it. It does feel like you're on a different planet when you go down there.
I heard that in Antarctica, there's a place referred to as the Illuminati Disneyland. Is that real?
Yeah, I bring that up in my presentation at conferences called The Hidden Anomalies of Antarctica. And do you remember back in 2016, 2017, when all these different celebrities and elites and royal family and politicians were going down there? And the question was, what are they going to see? They would often have a cover story. They wanted to see the penguins, or John Kerry is a climate champion. But he went missing for a couple days after he landed at McMurdo Base. And the question is, where's he going? What is there to see? And sure, it's beautiful, but up on the polar plateau, there's really not a lot of anything, especially for several days. So the presumption was a lot of these elite are going to this, what's known as the Illuminati Disneyland, which could be a couple things. It's probably under ice bases, but it could be one of the 3 big craft that have been detected under the ice and have been known about since the 1970s. In fact, the NSA, which is tasked at handling anything extraterrestrial, has nicknamed them the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria. And I do believe, conclusively pinpointed one of them. And interestingly enough, it happens to be in the New Schwabenland land claim of the Nazis in the late 1930s. There's one out at a base, which, by the way, the Germans never left that claim. They just became West Germany. And one of their bases is a temporary seasonal base out on the polar plateau where the ice is 2 miles thick. And they have a seasonal base there, presumably to investigate one of these Nina Pinta or Santa Maria massive motherships. And in the year 2013, you can even go on Google Earth in the Wayback Machine to the coordinates of the Conan base, Konhen. And in 2013, Google Earth shows an excavation of this massive machine-like craft under the ice. Then if you go back to those coordinates any other year, it looks like they put, I describe it as tent poles, like a circus tent over it. And you just see the top of the poles where there's this massive grill like structure that's about a 1/4 mile long. And now when you go back to it, it just looks like there's a some kind of covering over the structure. But Jeff, what I really like is when I can get confirming data points. And in the case of the Conan base, the remote viewers from the Farsight Institute did a remote view of this exact coordinates. And they got inside of this and they said it's not a natural formation by any means, but had been built for a species, must be non-human because they're very, very tall, 20, 25 feet tall entities. And with the possibility that some of those bodies were in stasis, that they hadn't completely perished, but were still alive and in kind of what we would call a coma-like state, but perhaps not with the brain damage, that they could still wake up. So this is the interesting thing about Antarctica, is it's got so many of these mysteries. And when you combine the data points, it really is the land that time forgot, and really could hold many mysteries to our ancient past.
Well, when you went down there, what did you see?
So my particular trip was on a sailboat over the stormiest seas in the world, crossing the Drake Passage, that is between the southern tip of South America, where we did get to see the famous Cape Horn, which is a pyramidal shaped island at the very southern tip of South America. But we went to the Palmer Peninsula. So it's the, you know, the South America comes down, it's like two fingers. It's the closest continental crossing from any other continent to Antarctica. And then I was on a sailboat for 26 days, my partner at the time and one other American. So it was 3 Americans and 11 Poles on this expedition to the Palmer Peninsula. So what I saw was the islands and the continental landmass of the Palmer Peninsula, just 1 degree above the Antarctic Circle. So we got pretty well south, and every day was a new adventure and a new opportunity to go to a different base or a penguin colony or watch the whales or just the spectacular scenery of a frozen continent. That's what I mean. It just didn't seem like we were on planet Earth because it's so different than any other place. No trees, for example, no bushes, really nothing green. Just black, blue, and white. The white of the snow, the white of the clouds, the black of the mountains, and the black of the animals, black and white animals like penguins and seals and whales, and the blue of the sky and the blue of the ocean. So it was really an adventure on sailboat, and I did get violently ill with seasickness on the way down, but had my sea legs after that and didn't get sick again. But I think I lost 25 pounds on that trip just because I threw up for 3 days straight.
Is there a window of time that you can actually make that trip because it's so cold down there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that window of time is starting right now. So middle November till early March is really the only time you want to go. Of course, that summer in the Southern Hemisphere. And a lot of people thought, and often ask me at conferences and elsewhere, oh, you must have been really cold. Well, yeah, of course we had cold weather clothes, but there were a couple days that it was warm enough to sit on the deck of the boat in our swimsuits. And I did the polar plunge 3 times. That is jumping into the ocean among the icebergs. Yeah, it's cold. But if you jump out and it's sunny out, which it was, or another time at the Vernansky Ukrainian research station, which we stayed at for 2 days. They're so hospitable, such friendly people. And they let us use the sauna, and we'd run out of the sauna super hot, jump into the super cold, and get right back up in the sauna. So that was the easy way to do the polar plunge.
You know, I've heard that Prince Harry may have been one of those people that went down there with all the other people that you mentioned.
He was.
But what I question is, I'm surprised that the governments, even though they're celebrities, well, maybe him since he's royalty, but you would think that they would still forbid people to go and take a look.
Well, that's a little bit of a misnomer, because we were allowed to just go anywhere we want in our boat. It's not like anybody was watching over us. Very rarely did we even see another boat. And if we did, it was either a cruise ship or another sailboat coming down from Ushuaia. One time we saw a military vessel. It was more like a Coast Guard ship, but per the Antarctica Treaty, you're not allowed to do any military activity down there. No training, no weapons testing, but you can bring in supplies. You can use a military for an emergency. And of course, many nations have bases down there. So it's a bit of a misnomer that Antarctica is this forbidden continent. Now, of course, we had to go to the Argentinian Navy and submit our itinerary where we thought we were going. Of course, no one is there to check if we deviated. But after the trip, I was interested in getting information about going down there again with a film crew, and it's still in the works. Unfortunately, COVID had interrupted what could have been a promising trip to go film in the New Schwabenland area, but we're working on another proposal now. So I went and talked to a travel company that does specific trips to Antarctica. And indeed, they said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, how about the South Pole? Yeah, we can get you there. How about Vincent Massif is the tallest mountain in Antarctica?" So yeah, we take a lot of climbers there, especially after they've summited all the peaks of the world. They got to summit the highest peak in Antarctica, which is about 14,700 feet. Not a huge mountain, but pretty big. And then I said, "What about those pyramids in the Shackleton Range?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we fly over those all the time." And he said, "We just call them nun attacks." I said, what does that mean?" He said, "Just an attractive mountain poking out under the ice. I think it's an Eskimo word." I said, "Well, did you ever land the plane there and climb the pyramid or take a sample or anything?" Like, no, we're just flying over it as we go to our outward base at Union Glacier. So I think the jury's still out on those pyramids. And if I were to put together a film crew expedition, definitely on my top 5 places to check out.
Is it true that they don't let commercial planes fly over Antarctica? Like you can't fly from Sydney around the bottom of the globe to South America?
Well, it's a very long distance. Antarctica is a huge country, and the distance between the continents is very vast too. So in the 1970s, they were doing charter flights, and they were leaving from New Zealand and doing a flight near McMurdo. And one of those planes, right when they started doing this, crashed into Mount Erebus. In fact, you can climb up there and still find the wreckage. It's not completely been cleared out. So they stopped doing that because they just used that as an excuse for being too dangerous. Now, people in the conspiracy research field think that that was intentionally crashed because the crash didn't really make much sense to be flying that low to hit this volcano not far from McMurdo Sound. Because if those flights would have continued, especially around the South Pole, it's a pretty good chance they would see the big gaping hole in the ice there, which is one of the biggest secrets of Antarctica, that there is this entrance to inner world, which Admiral Byrd described in his diary, which was published by his son after he died. When he came back from Operation High Jump, he had a gag order, and he could never really speak about Antarctica unless it were, he did that famous interview with the watchmaker, the black and white video, where he said that he has journeyed beyond the poles and he has seen in very veiled terms a different world there. But what is beyond the poles? What does that even mean? Just like he said that we would be facing an enemy that could fly from the pole to pole at incredible speeds after Operation High Jump. What does that mean? Are we dealing with a new kind of enemy, or are we dealing with high-tech technology flying devices in the late 1940s that we still don't even have a plane that could fly pole to pole at incredible speeds? So Byrd kind of left more breadcrumbs than anybody else as far as what might be down there. And he was the most traveled expert in the field, and still to this day has seen more of Antarctica than any other person. Of course, he has passed away, but his contribution, including naming several mountain ranges and plateaus like Marie Byrd Land, named after his wife, and also the Rockefeller Plateau. So he had sponsors in the US, including Edsel Ford and even the Rothschilds, who would sponsor his trips, and then he would name places after them, and they're still on the maps to this day.
All right, you've been on Ancient Aliens. Do you think that those pyramids were built by ETs? And if so, was it when the whole planet was a lot warmer? Or maybe the planet was shifted where that was much further north?
Yeah, and I would say the jury is still out. When I was coming back from my trip a little over 5 years ago, they contacted me and said, we're doing an Ancient Alien show on the pyramids, and would you want to be on it? I said, sure, of course. Had my schedule been 1 week sooner, I would have been on that episode, but I just couldn't get back in time based on all my flights coming back from South America. So the jury's still out. I would like to go there with a film crew, even doing some archaeological work on the pyramid. And let's just put this to bed once and for all. If it's a nun attack, then we call it an attractive mountain poking out of the ice. But if it shows that it had been fashioned by a higher intelligence, not even saying human, then that's a complete game changer. Then it puts a high-tech civilization on that continent before the ice, right? Because how do you build a pyramid below the ice and let it rise up? So it must prove that there was a high-tech civilization on Antarctica. Same thing with underwater archaeology, and that's my new presentation for 2024. Dozens of sites around the world, megalithic, carved into the rock, even cities that have been found now under the ocean level that could have only been created when the ocean levels were much lower than they are today.
Could any of those cities be considered to be Atlantis?
Well, there's a whole view on the western peninsula of Antarctica being part of Atlantis. Now, the only way that could be possible is if there was a big pole shift that moved the western peninsula, western Antarctica, to a present location during the last pole shift. But it's presumably a pole shift scenario when the poles move 45 degrees that you have these continental movements. Because the whole scientific study of tectonic plate movement, it's less than a century old. You know how South America and Africa look like they fit right together.
Right.
Other places like Australia broke off from Asia. Madagascar and India are moving up into Asia. Antarctica came out of that gap in the Indian Ocean when all the continental land masses was called Pangaea or Gondwana land. Moving into their present locations as they are today, every time there's a pole shift scenario, you have volcanoes going active around the world. You have massive tsunamis that can, by the weight of the water, sink lands down, such as in Gujarat off of India, a whole city underneath there. Another one called Doggerland between Denmark and England, another city under there that were thriving metropolises during the last ice age. So you have continents rising and falling, new land masses coming up out of the ocean, and then others moving down. So if West Antarctica had been part of Atlantis, and I think Atlantis was not just one singular location, but perhaps several colonies. And when I was heading down there 5 years ago, Jeff, I talked to some of my colleagues in the field, and Dr. Michael Sala has been very instrumental in providing me information. I told him I was going to Western Antarctica. Do you know anything I should try to check out down there? And he said, well, there is Rothschild Island. That's well below the Antarctica circle, so we didn't get there. But he has since provided me with GPS coordinates of areas in Western Antarctica that Google Earth, they give you information on their maps, and they'll also cover stuff up. So you can't find the hole in the ice, for example. They just even do a sloppy job of just putting a white screen over it. You can even see the perfect white edges of a rectangle. They're not even trying to use the mapping tools or anything else to disguise it. Just, nope, you're not seeing what's there. But amazingly, they'll give you these nuggets of other locations. And so Michael Sala passed on one to me of perfect rectangular foundational buildings, kind of looks like megalith structures, foundations for buildings. Of course, the resolution wasn't high enough to see it exactly for what it is. But here's the thing, Jeff, and this is with underwater archaeology, like the Bimini Roads in the Bahamas, where all these megalithic blocks, one after another, are in perfect formation. Mother Nature does not create in perfect 90-degree angles stacked together very precisely. That has the hand of a higher intelligence.
When these continents rise and sink, do you think these are events that happen very quickly?
They are, yeah. So new information about pole shifts are coming out all the time. And it is a very sudden event, but there are signs of what might be a pole shift leading up to it. For example, right now, we are about 13,000 years since the last pole shift, since the sinking of Atlantis. Right now, the magnetic poles, which are different from the geological poles, where the Earth is spinning as a top that we would play with as kids. You pull a string and those are the tops of the planet, the South and North Pole, spinning on an axis. But the magnetic poles are entirely different. The magnetic poles are lingering around the poles. The North Pole had been in the northern Hudson Bay area. It is now racing across the Arctic Ocean towards Siberia. Similarly, the magnetic South Pole is now off the continent of Antarctica and is moving up towards Australia. So the presumption would be if there was another pole shift, the new poles then would shift up 45 degrees to the next location, and then that would trigger a whole bunch of continental landmass movement, and our world maps would be completely different than they are today.
It'd be like that.
But the actual pole shift movement, as I understand it, is only a couple of days, and then you're going to deal with high winds and tsunamis and a nuclear winter, as described from all the volcanoes going off. So it would completely change the atmosphere and the composition of planet Earth.
Kind of reminds me of that movie Waterworld with Kevin Costner. I remember that.
Yeah.
I saw a video, I think it was on TikTok, and they were talking about blue ice in Antarctica. Do you know anything about that? And if so, is it real?
It is real. Well, there's two kinds of ice. So another one is called sky ice. And that one I've seen on videos. I didn't come across that at all. That's supposed to be a different composition, kind of like dry ice, where it's, if you touch it, your skin would come off. But the blue ice is just very old ice that gets compressed. And you can see it in the glaciers all over the place. So the very first research station we got to was a Polish base. And since 11 of the crew members were Polish, they welcomed us in, and we brought them fresh fruit and vegetables. They were very gracious for that. Living out of a can for a while, that gets old. And then they let us take showers and use the internet one time. And they invited us for drinks after dinner. And they came out with a bucket full of blue ice. I thought, wow, that's kind of attractive. And they chopped it up with a pick and put it in our drinks. And would you like a whiskey mash? Sure. And then they poured the whiskey into the glass with the blue ice, and it popped like popcorn. I've never seen anything like that before. It's pop, 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 with the water interacting with it. So it was so cool that we would then go out as the trip progressed on our dinghy, and we'd go up to the wall of a giant iceberg and chip off blue ice just so we could have that popcorn effect in our own drink. So that part is definitely true. The sky ice, I'm not so sure of. That those could just be somebody's imagination. I don't have additional information on that.
Right. And actually, after you said it, I think the video that I saw was actually sky ice.
Yeah.
But it looked pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
One of the places in the world that really fascinates me is Puma Picchu. Have you been there?
Oh, yeah. On this trip, before and after Antarctica, I was in South America for The whole trip was 4 months, Antarctica 26 days. So on the way down, went to Tiwanaku, and right next to Tiwanaku is this other site called Puma Picchu, which has the most precise blocks I've ever seen. In fact, Ancient Aliens done several shows on how precise they are, how each one's slightly different, and you would have to have a precise machining tools, that is, tools that could cut granite stone, some of the hardest stone to cut, as well as drill holes, Jeff, which you can even see the swirl inside some of the drill holes at Puma Picchu. Clearly high technology used to build that site. So what's really interesting about Tiwanaku and Puma Picchu, just right next to it, half a mile away, not only is there a pyramid at Tiwanaku, but it's 3 miles away from Lake Titicaca, the largest alpine lake in the world, super huge lake that separates Peru and Bolivia. But at Tiwanaku, there's evidence of a pier. And why would you have a pier 3 miles away from the lake? So the presumption is Puma Picchu, which is like a Lego set that a kid just threw up in pieces everywhere, that this was built prior to the last pole shift. And then the lake had moved and shifted and the level went down, or the Tiwanaku raised up and the lake level moved 3 miles away. So a very ancient site, and every single archaeologist agrees that Puma Picchu and Tiwanaku are pre-Incan, and they are the oldest archaeological artifacts in South America.
In your opinion, who were the pre-Incan people?
Well, this goes into the whole legend of Viracocha, that there were these cedar race of people, this high technology culture that came to South America and taught the pre-Incan people how to build megalithic structures, or perhaps they were the architects themselves, because the Incans told the Spanish, we got to Cusco and there was already a city existing. So why wouldn't you just put your capital right on top of an old existing capital? See evidence of that all over the world, just like Baalbek in Lebanon. Old pre-existing foundations that the Romans built their Temple of Jupiter on top of. Similarly, the Incans did the same. But what's so interesting about this Viracocha, that it's more than just legend, is that it would be depicted with facial hair, very, very tall, and sometimes the elongated skulls. And in South America, Jeff, you can go to museums such as Paracas, Peru, a whole museum with these elongated skulls. And we saw some in the Sacred Valley. Their torso was as big as the head. And this was an adolescent child that we saw and met the archaeologists who dug it up. And it was buried with the royal tombs, way up at the top of a mountain, over 13,000 foot elevation burial. But this juvenile had been ritually sacrificed, or took a blow to the back of the head. You could see the skull was cracked. But the skull is very different from ours. There's no central suture. The eye sockets are 30% bigger. So is the connection to the spinal cord. And you can clearly see this with all the other elongated skulls. They're human-like, but they're not human. And this, again, is a complete game changer. This is why when the elongated skulls were found in North America, sometimes in the mound sites or in old mines, Smithsonian Institution would come in and say, flash their badge like the FBI, oh, we're taking over here. And they would just confiscate all the bones, all the artifacts, never to be seen or heard from again. I have a example of this in my book, Beyond Esoteric, in a chapter called Suppressed Human Origins, about a team that was digging at Lake Delavan in southern Wisconsin, not too far away from where I grew up in northwestern Illinois. And they were doing everything by the book. They were archaeologists from Beloit College in southern Wisconsin. They were tipped off by a farmer that they discovered these bones in a mound site. right next to Lake Delavan. And I went out there and investigated. I think I found the location where the dig was. And they were finding these giants, 10, 12 feet tall. I mean, it couldn't even be human. The tallest human on record was the Alton giant in Southern Illinois, Robert Waldo. He was 8'11". These were even bigger. So local news media started covering the story. Then it kind of went out on the wire of the day. This is in the 1920s. New York Times even picked it up. Giants found at Lake Delavan. Then the Smithsonian Institution shows up, confiscates all the bones and artifacts. And they say, hey, wait a minute, we're doing a professional dig here. We need to find out the results. Oh yeah, we'll tell you. A couple months later, they tried to follow up. Smithsonian Institute said, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't have any bones. So this has been going on for years. There's a concerted effort to keep this out of the historical record. And again, it's a complete game changer because it would show that humans never were alone, that there were these elongated giants, perhaps the Anunnaki or the Nephilim that we read about in the Bible and other ancient texts that describe giants roaming the earth in prehistoric times. Even where I'm out here in northwestern Nevada, Jeff, I'm in the basin. I have a 10-acre ranch in a little town outside of Carson City in the lake basin called Lake Lahontan. And at the time of the last ice age, I would have been 200 feet underwater right now. There was a massive freshwater lake that spanned all across northwestern Nevada, all the way up to the Oregon border in California, where along the high level watermarks were these caves where they found these red-haired giants that were also mummified, similarly to the way the Egyptians mummified their dead and placed with burial items. And they had size 18-foot sandals they found. These things were massive. And although there were some photos and records of these giants when they found them about 100 years ago, again, not a trace of them anymore. I go into the museums and, hey, you got any of those giants here in the Winnemucca Museum? They're like, oh, one of you guys again. Yeah, get out of here. We don't have any giants. So they're just changing the history right before our eyes and denying us the whole notion that there was this other race of human-like beings that lived concurrently with other humans. And in the case of the Lovelock Cave giants, there was a Paiute elder named Sarah Winnemucca who wrote her family history about 100 years ago, talked about how the Paiute Indians, who are still the native people of this area, had battled with the giants, that the giants were cannibals and would eat the Paiute, and they had to wipe them out. And they eventually created a avalanche and trapped them all in the Lovelock Cave, and then burned fires outside to suffocate them. And eventually that's how they eradicated the giants in historic times. Even a few hundred years ago, the last giants still roam this area. So it's very interesting when you look at some of the Native American history of the area, that these giants keep popping up. And of course, they had bones that were pulled out of the Lovelock Cave and Spirit Cave, pretty close to where I'm at. And I'm going to be doing a little searching myself, Jeff. Maybe we find something, get back on the JeffMara podcast, and we'll make an announcement.
That would be amazing. You know, I think science's explanation for these elongated skulls is just that they wrap their heads or something to create that. When you looked at them, did you see any evidence of that?
Yeah, it's called cranial deformation. It was actually done by primitive people around the world. They do it still to this day in Africa. The Flathead Indians of Idaho were doing cranial deformation. And of course, down in South America, they were doing it. But here's the kicker. You can shape a skull any which way. It's even better when you start with a child. And you can shape a cranium to have a flat head like the natives do in Idaho, or you can even stretch it out. But what you cannot do is add 30% larger cranial capacity to the back as these elongateds have. You can't add extra brain or cranial capacity within the brain. That's impossible. You can only just take with what you have and then move it in different ways to shape it. So there's even in the Tiwanaku Museum a whole exhibition about cranial deformation, that the royal families, the Incan royal families, would do that. And I would think to imitate these elongateds that lived within them. But it wasn't them because they were human, Homo sapien, where these are different. Homo borgenesis is one name, or Homo capsaicus for the elongated skulls, that they're different species of human-like entities found on Earth. But unfortunately, so little data comes out because none of the academics want to deal with it. But some of my colleagues, such as Brian Forster and Klaus Dauna of Austria, have taken samples from the elongateds. And just like the Star Child skull in Mexico that was being taken around to conferences, a lot of people saw it. It was just this big bulbous skull. And in all cases, they found that it was matriarchal DNA of the mother, human mothers, but unknown DNA on the father's side. And that's very congruent with what they said in the Bible, that these men of renown, these giants, came to Earth. They saw that the women were fair, beautiful, mated with them, and had offspring. That would be the Nephilim. But here's what's so interesting. In the case of horses and donkeys, two similar species, but different, of course, but they can mate. And the offspring is a mule, but a mule is sterile. A mule cannot have their other children. So it could be that some of these elongateds are just the result of two similar species, humans, Anunnaki, mating, children being the Nephilim. That's my theory.
That makes sense to me. You mentioned Brian Forster, and I'm a fan of his videos on YouTube. There was a place that he showed, and I could never find that video again. I'm pretty sure it was in Peru, and it was like an aqueduct that kind of ended in a waterfall. And he was showing that if you put your finger on it, it almost slowed the water flow off the waterfall to nothing. And then you would touch it again and it would turn back on. It was like this mysterious magnetic device. Are you aware of what I'm talking about?
Not that particular one, but I know Brian. I've met him several times. Went on a trip through the Sacred Valley with him. He described all those water features as fountains. And after they cleared out some debris and cleaned up some of the channels that led from the water sources, the water still flows to this day. It's one of the little known things about Incan and pre-Incan engineering, that they built them so well that they still function. But that sounds like a fascinating site. I would love to know more about that. And geez, that's on my bucket list to go back. And you too, Jeff. There's nothing quite like Peru and Bolivia. Some of the most amazing megalithic archaeological sites you'll ever see. I mean, even rivaling Egypt. In the Sacred Valley of Peru, where Cusco is and many other locations, it's the highest density of megaliths in the world. There's just so many. You drive by in a bus, you just see one on the side of the road, and you barely bat an eye because they're just big and fantastic ones, but also all these smaller ones that are just amazing in their own right.
I know this may be a little off subject for you because it's not ancient history, but have you ever checked out the Coral Castle down in Florida?
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about that place?
It's amazing. I write about it in my Sacred Places North America book, and also Beyond Esoteric. That guy, Ed Lee Scalion, who built the Coral Castle, it's in Homestead, Florida, just outside of Miami. He built it single-handedly at night. And sometimes the kids would spy on him to see how he would get the blocks that he would quarry himself on his property and then move them into place. Some of those blocks, 33 tons.
Yeah.
He erected a monolith that still stands to this day, that also acts as a time-keeping device. And the kids would say that he would have these two cone-like things in his hand. He would also use levers and pulleys, but to lift 33 tons, but they'd say he would just move it magically. When asked how he did it, his only answer was, I knew the secrets of how the Egyptians built the Great Pyramids. That's all he had ever say. He went to his grave with that secret. And did you know that the Coral Castle is the only modern megalithic structure in the world, built single-handedly by this 99-pound little guy from Latvia in remembrance of a woman who stood him up when he came to America. So great spot to explore and see.
How do you think that these ancient cultures moved all these massive stones?
Some of them 70 tons. Yeah, amazing. Just like at Ollantaytambo in Peru, in the Sacred Valley, that's the town you catch a train to go to Agua Calientes to take the bus up to Machu Picchu, filled with megalithic sites. The one trip, the one episode on Ancient Aliens that I spoke about this was talking about auditive levitation, and that is matching the resonant frequency of a block, because all matter as we know it has a certain resonant frequency. So just imagine how a opera singer can shatter a wine glass with her voice. That's only a frequency wave that's going out that can affect matter in that way. Similarly, and I think this is a lost technology and would answer how all these megalithic structures around the world were created. Matching the resonant frequency of a megalithic block and being able to render it weightless and then just moving it right on over to position and then putting it down into place. I think that is how they did it. And we're still playing catch up to try to understand that. Now, levitation, it's not unprovable. It actually can take place. You can look at videos on YouTube of a bowling ball levitating, even a frog still alive, just kind of flapping its arms and legs around. Doesn't kill species either, but it's matching its resonant frequency and then rendering it weightless. So this is a technology, perhaps it's known and just being kept under wraps because it has military purpose. So if you could levitate, just like in Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty, that would be a huge advantage in a wartime scenario. So I think the military has this technology. They're just not willing to share it.
What do you know about cold plasma?
That's part two to the whole story. So cold plasma, this is great you brought this up, because Brian Forrester and Nassim Harriman, who were on this trip I was on before Antarctica through South America, Nassim Harriman was doing some experiments in his laboratory and discussing this technique called cold plasma. And that is basically rendering, again, like making it weightless, but rendering it soft. So making these stones malleable. And we saw example after example in South America, and you could see it also in Egypt and other locations, what looked like a softening of the stone. So that in the same way that a person who works with plaster has tools, a trowel to smooth down the walls, these megalithic stones, Jeff, had these impressions, not chisel marks. You never see chisel marks in the megaliths in South America, but they formed these blocks in these most unusual ways to fit with each other that looks like they were in a softened state, that just gravity set them into place. And then that's why you have those knobs at the bottom of many of the megaliths. So while it was softening and hardening, the liquid stone would have a chance to come down into the lower portions of the megalithic stone and then just expand out a little bit. But some of those fitted stones, which are some of these most unusual angles, perfectly fitted and no cracks, no gaps. We even tried to put a credit card or a piece of paper in them to no avail. They are so precisely fitted. And then that would answer, the cold plasma would answer how they fitted these megalithic stones so precisely.
Yeah, I think I've seen an episode on Ancient Aliens about that in Machu Picchu, it just looks like the stones were melted together, get those angles. Yep. Do you take people on tours like Brian does?
Boy, I get asked all the time to do that. I probably could and make a decent living. I just haven't done it. I just like traveling my style and with a girlfriend or a couple other people. I should look into doing that. So many people said they'd sign up for my trips, and maybe I will. It's a good way to get out there and do some traveling and meet some new people. I just didn't want to be looking for lost luggage or helping the little old lady on the bus or having to deal with all the kind of little minor things that always come up on trips. Kind of like to just travel my way. That's how I've always done it.
That makes sense. So you mentioned that you're working on your next book about underwater megaliths. When is that going to be out?
Well, it's actually a conference presentation, and it will be out in 2024, but I am parlaying some of that underwater information into my 11th book, which is called Esoteric Antarctica. And so what's underwater around Antarctica, you ask? Well, interesting enough, there is a very unusual relic between Cape Horn, southern tip of South America, and Antarctica, and it's called the Atlantis antenna. And in 1964, they were just surveying the bottom of the ocean in this the Drake Passage region in a ship called Atlantis, and they discovered this massive, looks like a 5G tower on the bottom of the seafloor. So that'll be in the book and in the presentation. But I would also like to locate the wreckage from Operation High Jump, the Battle of High Jump, which took place right offshore New Schwabenland when Admiral Byrd basically got his ass handed to him. And that's when they ended the 6-month expedition after 2 months. So there is a destroyer under the ocean called the USS Murdoch. And that's an interesting name because the Murdoch was also the ship during the Gulf of Tonkin incident. But the Navy is known to use different names for different reasons to throw off truthers, truth seekers. So I think that ship is at the bottom of the ocean off of New Schwabenland, as well as the submarine and several airplanes that went down that day, and that very fateful day when the Antarctica Nazis, whether they were helped with a malevolent ET or if they had so far advanced their technology to fly their Honeyboo or Vril craft that were being developed pre-World War II and actually made their debut at the end of World War II in several theaters of war. But all that stuff got taken out of Germany when they knew that they were losing the war. They knew in 1943 when everything tipped the tide in Russia that they were going to lose. So they had enough time to get out all their high-tech devices from an area called the Skoda Works in what is today Czech Republic. And none of that was found by the Russians or the Americans. But we got a lot of their scientists that came over here in Project Paperclip, including Herman Orbereth, who said, we had help from our friends from above, and Werner von Braun, who also had some very telling quotes that they were backward engineering technology and had mastered the UFO craft. And so in the Battle of High Jump, these craft came up out of the water and our guns could not shoot them down. And it was a very one-sided battle that day where we lost quite a bit of material and personnel. And enough, they could have taken out the whole armada, but they didn't, because they wanted to just send a message back with Admiral Byrd, don't mess with New Schwabenland. But interestingly enough, they did mess with New Schwabenland. And that was about a decade later during Operation Argus, where they were doing high altitude nuclear bomb testing. Well, that was the cover story. But why do you have to go all the way down to the Southern Ocean off the shore of New Schwabenland to do your high altitude nuclear testing? Where in fact, I think they were bombing base 211 in the New Berlin base with atomic bombs. So if I were to go down there with a film crew, one thing we would do is bring some Geiger counters. If we can find out if it was still radioactive, then it would show that that Operation Argus, which is, by the way, still top secret, can't get the records on it through Freedom of Information Act, was to take out the Nazi bases. And sure enough, just a year later, we get the formation of the Antarctica Treaty. And one of the main clauses in the Antarctica Treaty is you can never do nuclear testing in Antarctica. Well, that seems kind of strange to make that such a big point if it's never been done before. You just say it'll never happen again, but it's almost saying, okay, well, we did it, but we don't want it to happen ever again. So that's kind of a tell that they did nuke the Nazi base there. But by that time, in the late 1950s, the Germans didn't like being down there, and they had moved much of their operation, including the testing of these UFOs, to South America. When I was going down to South America, I was going over all these maps of not only Antarctica, but also South America. I was finding that there are massive land holdings in Chile, in Argentina, and Brazil, where they've essentially created micronations. And this is where the Fourth Reich was operating, and perhaps still to this day, acting as a third force. So remember, the way we learn history, there was the Soviet bloc, and then there was the NATO allies and the Cold War. Well, all the while, these Fourth Reich Nazis were fanning the flames of discontent, but they had left New Schwabenland by the late 1950s. They didn't like it down there. It was too cold, too lonely. And every time a U-boat came with new supplies, if one of the crew members just had a sniffly nose, because nothing can live down there, no viruses or any other pathogens as we know it, contagious colds or flu, because it's so cold. But one person comes off the U-boat and then everybody would catch the cold, and they didn't like that. So they had moved out of there by then, and I don't think the nuclear attack of Operation Argus really affected them too much. There might have been a skeleton crew, but as far as I know, those bases were discontinued and abandoned. So boy, to get a film crew down there, that would just be amazing. And I know where it is. It's near the Schumacher Ponds in an area called the Schumacher Hills, which never freezes over. It's a geothermal lake that never freezes. And the land also never freezes. It's what they call an oasis in Antarctica. And in this book called The Dark Sun by Henry Stevens, he was describing some of the Antarctica crew would come up to the surface. And like I described earlier, there'd be nice days in the sun. You could lay out and get a suntan. They were even growing their own crops in this oasis landscape. So I think to get to the Schumacher Hills to investigate where base 211 was, it would just make an amazing story. So I'm talking to an investor right now who wants to, we're working on a proposal to send it out and go down there with a film crew and just go investigate all this stuff. That's the best way to really get to the bottom of whether or not there was nuclear testing there, or pyramids poking out of the ice. So hopefully that'll happen.
A lot of people believe that there are ET bases down there. Is there any credibility to that, or perhaps they were old German bases?
Well, the story was the reptilians were helping out the Third Reich. They were part of how the Germans moved so quickly, technologically advanced in that period, and they had given them the base 211, that it was a defunct, unused reptilian base. This is the storyline I've heard on a couple different points. And the Schumacher mission, who landed the plane in those lakes, the crew went out and they knew where they were supposed to look, and apparently they found it. So they rehabbed an old Antarctic base. Now, your question, are there still bases down there? I think there are. And this is why Antarctica could be the real breakthrough disclosure we need, the evidence we could find. Not only our own bases, which I think if this base 211 has been abandoned again, would be incredible documentary film to make, but also if we could find any traces of extraterrestrial artifacts, and that would be the Conan base. So we would want to go there too with this film crew and check that out. Because if they were doing an excavation in 2013, 10 years later, I bet the entrance is still open. To get down in there, it would be an absolute game changer. Whether we can get the permission to do it, that's another story. But we're kind of coming into the age of disclosure, Jeff. I think you understand that it's not as covered up anymore as it used to be. So there could be an opportunity to that they would just allow something like this to happen. But of course, there is permission to be gathered, and the Germans would have to approve filming down there to go out to their base and so forth. It would be a bit of a challenge to get all the permits, but maybe it's the zeitgeist of the age, just the right time to go down there and do it.
Do you think there's anything under all that ice in Greenland?
Well, certainly the propensity for it, but the difference between Greenland and Antarctica, the first and second largest sheets of ice on a continental landmass, is Greenland largely has no volcanoes or geothermal features as Antarctica does, which stretch right on through the continent. And therefore, in Antarctica, you have the propensity for these large under ice domes to exist. Therefore, you have a ready-made base right there. It's already carved out of the ice, and you have a heat source and a fuel source. So if there were these under ice, or not even necessarily underground bases, Antarctica would be the place to look.
You're going to be a featured speaker at the Sedona Ascension Retreat coming up in March of next year. What are you going to be covering? Some of your new information about the underwater megaliths?
Well, I would like to. If I was asked to give that presentation, I certainly would. I think Suzanne Ross and I are going to present another TV show that we're working on called The One New Earth. And we have some pilot episode that we're going to play for the audience and then come out and describe a couple of the episodes. So what I know right now is that we're going to do that. And hopefully I'll have the presentation completed and asked to give it at the Sedona Ascension Retreat, which is March 8, 9, 10. It's a little earlier than the spring equinox this year, but good time for me because it's ski season and I'm heading up to Colorado to ski with my dad and brother right after that. And hope to see you there, Jeff. Got to get you out to one of these conferences.
I agree. Can you give us a little sample of this one Earth that you're talking about?
Sure. Well, Suzanne Ross and I have been great friends for a long time, and we filmed a pilot and some sample episodes. We basically go out to sacred places, which is the theme of 3 of my books. I did Sacred Places North America, Sacred Places Europe, and Sacred Places around the world, 108 destinations. So the idea would be to go out on the land and just do investigations. So the pilot episode, we went to the vortex sites of Sedona and just reported on what we felt. You can feel a surge of energy coming out at these locations, and other Native American sites, petroglyph sites. One is called the V-Bar V Ranch, where you can see the petroglyphs carved into the rock that have associations with the summer solstice and the equinoxes. So just putting together a show of different places and their way that they interact with humans, and make a whole series out of that we're pitching to Gaia TV and elsewhere to pick up and make a whole series out of it.
That would be cool. You've been at this for a long time. What inspires you to keep doing your work?
Well, boy, Jeff, there's just so many mysteries out there and so many places to see in the world. Although I've been to all 7 continents, I've only been to Egypt and Africa. So I got a whole continent down there to explore. I'd love to go to the Great Zimbabwe and some of the ancient gold mines that Michael Tellinger has discovered and written about, including Adam's calendar and that big footprint, the 5-foot footprint, which shows 6 toes, by the way. That's another feature of the really old giants, 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand and foot. And Michael Tellinger had this one site he takes people to. So I'd go on people's trips, but I don't necessarily want to lead them. Yeah, so much more to see. And that's what keeps me going. It's just, there's just so many mysteries in the world, even right here in our backyard. Like I said, looking for giants in northwestern Nevada, and everybody has them. So when I talk about my book, Sacred Places North America, and people are looking at it, I said, look up your state, look up your area. And when I was going down to Blythe, California, right along the Colorado River, they have these geoglyphs in the landscape on the Arizona side, but most of them are on the California side. And I'm in the diner just having lunch right afterwards, and said to the waitress, "Hey, I was just out of the Blythe." They call them intaglios. I said, "Do you know of any other ones in the area?" She said, "Oh, I've seen that roadside, but I've never stopped to go look at it." So people have them right there in their backyard. They don't even know they have them. So I highly encourage people to check them out for themselves. And I give directions in all my travel guide books. I started out as a travel guide author, and always try to make my books evergreen so they never go out of style. And the directions to a megalithic site will never go away because the site's always going to be there. So I like to just keep going out and collecting more of these locations, and even going back to some that I've been to and then re-examining them. For example, using archaeoastronomy to see if the alignments add up. So go there on solstice or equinox and check out the sun shining through, and you'll see for yourself that these sites were obviously made with intention to tell the seasons and the alignments of stars and solar alignments.
I think we'd both agree that a lot of information is being kept from us.
Yeah.
In your opinion, why?
Well, it rewrites history, and that's a problem, because when you put these elongated skulls on Earth living concurrently with humans, or these giants, well, doesn't that change the whole cookie cutter model of history that we learned? And I think part of it is also the whole notion in this country of manifest destiny. So this was written about in the 19th century, and this is what encouraged all the settlers to go west and claim their stake their land, 10 acres and a mule. The government would just give them free land and to encourage settlement. Well, there happened to have been large settlements of Native American people in the way, and they did not like to give Native Americans credit. In fact, they called them noble savages. That was about the best you can get out of a description in the 19th century of Native American people. But part of the problem was also John Wesley Powell, who went down the Grand Canyon, first one to navigate the Grand Canyon. And when he went down it, he saw the cave. I'm sure he did. The cave at the Crystal Creek. because the next expedition was the Kincaid expedition. And they got into the cave, and that's where the Arizona Gazette reported on finding all these artifacts of the Far East, including mummified giants. And then they put the kibosh on it, just like the day after Roswell. Remember, the Roswell crash was in the headlines of the newspaper. Next day, no, crash test dummies. It was just a test balloon or whatever excuse they made. They would not tell you what it was. Same thing is true with the giants and this prehistory around the world. Now, some countries are opening up and displaying the elongated skulls, as I mentioned. But in this country, there's still a very, very strict protocol on what you can announce and what you can't. And again, this goes back to John Wesley Powell, who considered the Native Americans as savages and did not want them to have the credit, because maybe they would make land claims and say, no, actually, this is our land. John Wesley Powell went on to become one of the first administrators of the Smithsonian Institution. So that's where you get Smithsonian Gate, and that still continues to this day. And that's why that's just to deny and to obscure any new findings and to just get them out of the way, out of sight, out of mind. So Smithsonian Gate has been accused of taking the giant bones and artifacts and just shipping them off to a boat and dropping them into the Atlantic Ocean. Just get them out of here. We don't want them. But maybe some are in big crates underneath the Smithsonian Institution, like at the end of, remember at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Ark of the Covenant is in one of those big crates in a warehouse. Maybe someday they'll open them up and give us our true history, as they should. That is what Smithsonian Institution was, set up to be a museum of our natural history. But they were also implicated in the cover-up of that natural history.
If people want to find out more about your books, should they go to your website or to Amazon?
To the website. They are available on Amazon and in bookstores nationwide. But if they go to CCC Publishing, is the publishing website, my books and other authors are all available. And you can look at the Google Books app on each one of the book pages. So you can browse the book like you would do in a bookstore. I think that's fair. You can read the whole book if you want on the app. But people like to have physical copies. And if you order a book of mine through CCC Publishing, then I can sign a copy for you. Those all go through my office, so I can do that for people. And if you want to know more about what I'm up to and my conference schedule, that's on bradolsen.com. Those are the two websites people should go to.
This is the off topic, but I've been looking at it all during this podcast. What is the necklace that you're wearing?
Oh, I got this in Mount Shasta at the summer conference. A friend of mine, Seth, makes them. And I'm not sure. It's some kind of red stone. And yeah, a lot of people like it. So I keep wearing it.
From my viewpoint, it looks something Egyptian, but I'm on the other side of Zoom here.
Could be right. I can't even see it myself. It's on a choker. But yeah, it's cool. People like it. Comment.
Well, Brad, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Well, it's a very exciting time to be alive. I think we're watching the drip, drip, drip of disclosure become a pretty steady stream. There's going to be information coming out that is going to confirm our real ancient history as being much, much, much older than we've ever been taught. So history is being rewritten right before our very eyes. And I do believe in our lifetime, Jeff, that we will have meaningful contact with extraterrestrial species. And it, again, will be an absolute complete game changer. And this could be the beginning point of a golden age for humanity. This could be the time when we just see it all unravel. The Great Awakening is happening right before our eyes. And it's just a wonderful time to be alive and to play our part in helping people understand this very pivotal moment in human history. and to play a role with your podcast, my books, our interview, that people should be excited to be alive and see this all happening right here, right now.
Brad, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for having me on, and we should definitely do it again sometime.
As soon as your next book is out, let me know.
I thought you were going to say as soon as I get my next necklace. And we do that too.
Yeah. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.